In the vastness of space, amidst the countless stars and nebulae that dot the cosmic canvas, lies a truth that many spacefaring civilizations have come to accept. The universe is filled with wonders and terrors in equal measure. Among these civilizations exists an interplanetary governance known as the galactic bureaucracy, a collection of species that have achieved spaceflight and banded together for mutual benefit and protection. I, Xantor of the Gelic Confederation, serve as one of the many diplomats within this grand alliance, and it is through my eyes that I shall recount the most remarkable tale of first contact that has ever graced our records. It began, as many significant events do, with a mistake. A colossal oversight that would forever alter the balance of power within our galaxy. The discovery of humanity was not the result of careful observation or planned exploration, but rather an embarrassing administrative error of galactic proportions. When we first made contact with humanity, we were genuinely surprised. After all, it's not every day that an interplanetary government screws up so badly that they manage to miss an entire new sentient species within their own territory. This underdeveloped region may have been an insignificant backwater by our standards, but considering the sheer volume of radio signals the humans had been carelessly broadcasting into the void, our leadership had absolutely no excuse for their oversight. The questions surrounding this monumental failure would need to wait, as the humans certainly wouldn't. They had already deciphered elements of our language, an impressive feat in itself, and were attempting to establish communication with one of our colony worlds which they had apparently been observing for approximately one of their years. Thankfully, the galactic bureaucracy maintained protocols for such scenarios, typically reserved for primitive species that had finally discovered faster-than-light travel. Following these guidelines, a spherical region with a radius of 100 light-years around their homeworld was designated as their territory. Unfortunately for us, approximately 30% of this newly allocated space encroached upon Karkan territory, but I shall elaborate on that particular complication later. When our diplomatic envoys finally established formal contact with this emerging species, their physical appearance and behavioral patterns astonished us even further. You see, Earth resided at the absolute upper limit of the gravitational spectrum that our theoretical models had predicted for planets capable of producing spacefaring civilizations. In fact, if their planetary gravity had been even marginally higher, their initial spaceflight attempts would have been physically impossible to achieve orbit, likely leading them to abandon such endeavors as we had witnessed with several other species throughout our history. The only alternative would have been upliftment by another spacefaring race, but such interventions were exceedingly rare, as few civilizations were willing to shoulder the immense responsibility of shepherding a high-gravity species into the galactic community. Allow me to provide additional context for those who have not had the privilege of encountering a human in person. Most sapient species that evolve on high-gravity worlds tend to be approximately half the size of humans at their largest, typically relying on their intelligence and numerical advantage to overcome challenges collectively and compete against larger predatory species. However, this is not to suggest that humans themselves are particularly large creatures. Quite the contrary, their average height, roughly 2 of their meters, is slightly less than half the galactic median height. Consequently, humans possess remarkable physical strength compared to other high-gravity sapients, and truly monstrous strength when measured against the average galactic species. Furthermore, humans move with a peculiar lack of grace, having adapted to their crushing gravity over countless generations. Their movements appear quick and efficient, almost mechanical in comparison to the fluid motion displayed by other races. This characteristic rapidly earned them a reputation as clumsy powerhouses throughout the bureaucracy. Their seemingly boundless optimism and unflappability in most circumstances only reinforced this stereotype. I say most circumstances because humans displayed a curious vulnerability when discussing their history. It was rather endearing, if I'm being completely honest, watching human diplomats blush and squirm as they recounted what was, by galactic standards, a boringly common history of warfare and societal conflict. They were so deeply ashamed of their past that several of our diplomats couldn't help but laugh as they explained to the increasingly relieved humans that they weren't considered monsters merely for engaging in a few wars among their own people. Another factor contributing to their developing reputation was humanity's tendency to solve problems through brute force. Human engineers regularly employed what they termed percussive maintenance techniques when working on ships and stations. To quote one particularly apt saying, "The only surprising thing about a human smashing a piece of delicate machinery to fix it is that it actually starts to work once they are done." The more we discovered about humans, the more amusing they appeared to be. They quickly became the subject of numerous jokes among bureaucracy members. When the humans inevitably discovered this fact, our government braced itself for severe diplomatic repercussions. Part of the reason so many jokes circulated about humans was that, despite our amusement, many species harbored a lingering fear of these unnaturally strong primates. But the humans, to borrow one of their own expressions, the humans didn't give a fuck. They simply laughed off the jokes, and even shared several self-deprecating ones of their own creation. While this reaction helped alleviate many concerns that bureaucracy species had regarding humans, it also inspired several new jokes offered in good faith, I assure you. One particularly popular jest suggested that if any species attempted to invade human territory, the humans would surrender their homeworld without resistance. For the subsequent few years, humans contentedly expanded within their designated buffer zone, establishing mining operations, colonies, and trade agreements with remarkable efficiency. It became apparent that humans were naturally suited for labor-intensive work. With galactic average intelligence, which, to give humans proper credit, was certainly nothing to dismiss, combined with their extraordinary strength and seemingly inexhaustible energy reserves, they could produce resources and consumer goods at rates unprecedented in our records. The economic future for humanity appeared increasingly promising, particularly due to the exceptional quality of their manufactured goods. Unfortunately, their most lucrative trade agreement would soon collapse under the weight of cultural misunderstanding. During their initial foray into interspecies commerce, humans secured an exceptionally profitable trade deal with the Sarka Stellar Gospel, a deeply religious avian species that had been attempting to peacefully convert their galactic neighbors to their faith, albeit with minimal success. This agreement formed the backbone of the human economy, providing them with the essential resources required to begin production on a scale previously unimaginable in human commercial history. This makes the subsequent incident all the more unfortunate. A human leader was inadvertently recorded by a peripheral system tabloid publication, referring to the Sarka as the Jehovah's Witnesses of the galaxy, expressing mild annoyance with their persistent evangelism, despite acknowledging their excellence as trading partners. The article eventually reached the Sarka High Speaker, who, outraged by these comments, immediately declared that all Sarka commerce with such a godless and ungrateful species would cease forthwith. She promptly contacted her diplomatic representatives within the bureaucracy and instructed them to propose a formal trade embargo. When this embargo was presented for other species to sign if they wished to join in economically isolating humanity, we anticipated an explosive reaction from the humans, as this development would undoubtedly plunge their economy into a prolonged recession. But once again, in keeping with their established pattern, the humans didn't give a fuck. To be fair, humans were significantly impacted by this development. They simply appeared remarkably unconcerned. They even issued formal apologies for the inappropriate remarks made by their leader that had so offended the Sarka. Their economy had indeed been dependent on that trade agreement, and it would require approximately 2 decades to fully recover, even though only one other species signed the embargo. This additional signatory, was the perpetually isolationist "fuck off. You xeno scum don't deserve to know the name of our species or its glorious empire." Yes, that is precisely how they are identified in our database. Yes, they insist that we recite the entire absurd designation before they will acknowledge our presence. No, we remain uncertain why they continue attending bureaucracy gatherings at all. Of course, they had already established embargoes against every other civilization, so this likely represented a convenient opportunity to extend their policy to the newcomers. Humanity's difficulties with the broader galactic community did not end there. As they were completing the final stages of economic reconstruction, they finally attracted the attention of the Kirkan Infinite Armada, with whom they shared a border. Despite the best efforts of other bureaucracy members to keep information about humans away from Kirkan intelligence networks, this encounter was inevitable. For those unfamiliar with this particular faction, the Kirkan Infinite Armada represented a heavily militarized nation that had been terrorizing the galaxy for 5 centuries. They operated independently from the galactic bureaucracy and were, thankfully, neither genocidal nor excessively expansionist. Nevertheless, they possessed sufficient military might to engage the entire bureaucracy simultaneously and either maintain a stalemate or potentially emerge victorious. They had methodically annexed territory from neighboring civilizations and had at various points in their history declared war against every member of the bureaucracy. Now this formidable juggernaut had turned its attention toward the emerging human civilization. To the Kirkans, humans represented an unknown quantity, but more significantly, they appeared vulnerable and ripe for conquest. We had been reasonably successful in concealing detailed information about humanity, but when the Kirkans discovered the physical capabilities of humans, they became almost frenzied with eagerness to test themselves against this new species. During what had begun as an ordinary session of the bureaucracy, a representative from the Kirkan Infinite Armada dramatically flung open the chamber doors and formally declared war against humanity. By this point, the other races had become sufficiently familiar with human behavioral patterns to be unsurprised when the humans didn't give a fuck. The humans looked to us for assistance in defending their territory, but we could not risk provoking the Kirkans into attacking our own peoples. We explained the futility of resisting the Kirkan military machine, even if every bureaucracy member combined forces to support them. The humans simply nodded, excused themselves from the chamber to formulate their strategy, and we wished them fortune in what appeared to be an impossible situation. Several days later, as with every previous conflict, human and Kirkan representatives were brought before the bureaucracy in a final attempt to avert warfare. To everyone's surprise, the Kirkans' demands were relatively modest. They requested only a 10 light-year strip along their shared border with humanity. The assembled diplomats were astonished by the restraint shown by this typically insatiable military power, until we realized with growing horror that the human homeworld, Earth, lay within that 10 light-year zone. It was at this moment that even the Sarkan and the isolationists, no, I refuse to recite their full designation again, regarded the human representative with undisguised pity. We all expected their characteristic nonchalance to manifest once more, anticipating that they would simply relinquish their homeworld, as all the jokes had predicted. We observed what appeared to be resignation on the human diplomat's face, as she undoubtedly realized the implications of these terms. Any moment, we expected a disheartened chuckle, followed by verbal confirmation of surrender. Instead, we experienced a prolonged unnatural silence, finally broken by a declaration that I have framed and displayed on my desk to this day. We of the Human Emirate Republic have deemed these terms to be unacceptable. Prepare yourselves for war. With those words, humanity declared war against the most powerful military force in the galaxy, and they didn't give a fuck. Approximately 1 month following this declaration, the human fleet had undergone a remarkable transformation. Humans had proven themselves exceptionally industrious, and the speed with which they constructed vessel after massive vessel only reinforced this reputation. Additionally, seemingly out of spite, humans proposed a comprehensive embargo against the Karkan Infinite Armada. The proposal was meticulously detailed, specifying that not a single credit would be exchanged between bureaucracy members and the Karkan Infinite Armada for the duration of the conflict. The humans applied considerable diplomatic pressure on us to endorse this embargo, citing our inability to provide military assistance and asking us to at least do this for us. We signed it, all of us, including the isolationists. This agreement posed minimal hardship, as our commerce with the Karkans was already quite limited. Their primary export consisted of mining explosives, and their imports were restricted to luxury intoxicants, so they merely dismissed our action with contemptuous laughter when informed of the embargo. 2 months after the declaration, a meeting was convened to establish protocols for the imminent conflict. The human High General, a woman named Felicia Arates, and the human High Admiral, a man named Simon Bakel, met with the Karkan Infinite Admiral, who declined to provide a name, asserting that his rank and position as leader of his species far outweighed any personal identifier. The human representatives presented a document to the bureaucracy that appeared remarkably reasonable and elicited murmurs of approval from all members. However, the final decision rested with the Infinite Admiral, who would determine whether to accept these terms. Following the tradition established with most newly encountered species, the Infinite Admiral took the meticulously prepared document and dramatically tore it to pieces before the human commanders. There will be no rules to this engagement. I wish to see the full extent of your capabilities, humans. I will confront you with claws unblunted by something as meaningless as rules of war, and I expect you to respond in kind, the Karkan declared, displaying a predatory grin. The humans, in characteristic fashion, didn't give a fuck. They exchanged glances, nodded in apparent agreement, and simply replied, "Very well," before departing without further comment. Thus began the war, and initially, humanity appeared to be losing catastrophically. Their fleet surrendered light year after light year of territory. But those massive vessels they had been constructing were nowhere to be seen. We assumed they were protecting their colonies from surprise attacks. This assumption persisted until the Karkan fleet reached the first human colony world. Astonishingly, the humans offered no resistance whatsoever. Not a single military vessel defended the system, and as the Karkans commenced orbital bombardment without opposition, the rest of the bureaucracy expressed profound outrage. How could humans abandon their own populations to such merciless attack? The human representatives remained impassive and unmoved by our indignation and demands for action. They calmly reminded us that they simply lacked the military capacity to repel the Karkans and referenced their earlier requests for assistance before hostilities commenced. This pointed observation effectively silenced our protests. Their words wounded us deeply, yet our words appeared to have no effect on them. It seemed they were indifferent even to the fate of their own people, until we received an infuriated transmission from the Karkan Navy. The humans had completely evacuated the entire colony. The Karkans had wasted thousands of tons of nuclear, biological, and chemical ordnance on an unoccupied world. Shortly thereafter, we received an even more outraged communication from the Karkans. In retaliation for rendering their colony world uninhabitable due to radiation and biological contamination, the humans had launched precision biological strikes against all major Karkan ranch worlds. The horrific combination of viruses, bacteria, parasites, and even prions that the humans had deployed made the livestock upon which the exclusively carnivorous Karkans depended inedible and lethal. In that single operation, the Karkans lost over 90% of their food production capacity. Given the embargo that they had effectively coerced us into signing months earlier, we were powerless to intervene. Within a single hour, the humans had condemned billions of Karkans to eventual starvation without displaying the slightest hesitation. The human representatives merely exhibited the grim satisfaction of a successfully executed mission when they heard the Infinite Admiral's furious protestations. The Karkans naturally attempted retaliatory strikes against human agricultural worlds, but here they encountered their first significant resistance. The humans defended their agricultural centers with exceptional ferocity, even more intensely than their industrial facilities. The humans engaged in combat where their tremendous strength and smaller stature provided maximum advantage. They constructed boarding craft by the thousands, and the Karkans' numerical superiority and technological edge offered little protection against human boarding parties. The Karkans adapted quickly, however, and began rigging their vessels to self-destruct before humans could capture them and redirect their weapons against the remainder of the Karkan fleet. After months of conflict and thousands of human and Karkan ships and lives lost, the Karkans eventually succeeded in similarly devastating human agricultural capabilities. However, the omnivorous humans possessed the advantage of being able to cultivate food in hydroponic facilities aboard their vessels. Not only did the humans deploy biological weapons against their own agricultural worlds before they could be captured, but they also slaughtered and immolated their livestock in conflagrations visible from orbit before Karkan ground forces could land. By this stage, the Karkan population had begun experiencing starvation. Reports from our operatives in Karkan space painted a grim picture. Civil unrest was spreading, and several factions had resorted to cannibalism. In retaliation, the Infinite Admiral conducted a public execution on their homeworld of all human prisoners, primarily farmers who had volunteered to remain on agricultural worlds and maintain food production for as long as possible. The humans predictably didn't give a fuck. They expressed sincere condolences to the families of those who had volunteered to stay behind, but the conflict continued unabated. We inquired whether humans required food supplies for their population, but they declined our offer. Humans understood that an interplanetary civilization with sufficient motivation could produce enough food to destabilize the entire galactic economy, which is precisely what they had done while evacuating their worlds and expanding their fleet. Trillions of tons of food had been produced, preserved, and packaged, enough to sustain their entire species for centuries if not millennia, much of which remains in storage even today. Regarding those evacuations, most of the massive vessels we had observed under construction were designated Ark ships by humans. These enormous craft transported billions of civilians into interstellar space, each equipped with sufficient provisions to last centuries. All humans needed to do was wait. The Karkan Infinite Admiral, recognizing that his empire was disintegrating and that victory was no longer achievable, issued another enraged proclamation. The full might of the Karkan Infinite Armada converged on the Sol system in a week-long battle that culminated with the Karkans deploying a gravitational catalyst against Earth. The gravitational waves generated by this weapon fractured Earth into 12 segments. When news of Earth's destruction reached the bureaucracy chamber, we were shocked to witness for the first time since initial contact, humans genuinely giving a fuck. To describe the experience as unsettling would be a profound understatement. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a human, a pure-blooded, earth-born human, was observed giving a fuck. However, they did not display the rage we anticipated. They did not demand blood or call for genocide. Instead, they exhibited profound grief. They mourned the loss of their cradle world, a tragedy that would require centuries to overcome. Yet even as they grieved, a dangerous determination began to manifest, and it terrified every non-human observer. In that moment, we understood that humans were committed to seeing this conflict through to its conclusion, regardless of the consequences. Subsequently, the human fleet began reclaiming territories until they had forced the exhausted and starving Karkans back to the edge of their original borders. Only then did the Karkan government sue for peace. Their fleet was in ruins, barely operational on the minimal food they could synthesize aboard their vessels. The same two humans, High General Felicia Aratas and High Admiral Simon Bakiel, met with the emaciated remnant of what had once been the imposing figure of the Karkan Infinite Admiral. All species except humans regarded the withered Karkan with compassion as he spoke, already anticipating the response from the stone-faced humans to his unspoken question. "Humans, you have consumed my empire from within. When last we spoke, I told you that we would attack without restraint, and encouraged you to respond similarly. I can state with certainty that this was the greatest mistake in my species' history," the weary Karkan said, swallowing with difficulty as he forced himself to continue. "Now that you have driven us back to our border, and our defeat is inevitable, I must perform my final duty as leader of my people. The Karkan Infinite Armada formally declares surrender," the defeated admiral said, the capitulation evident in his eyes as he removed his ceremonial weapon and presented it to the two humans. "Please, I recognize that after what we inflicted upon your cradle world, we deserve no mercy, but I cannot bear to witness any more of my people starve. Please show them compassion." The silence that followed was deafening. The expressions of sympathy on every face except those of the still stoic humans deepened, and the knowledge that the Karkan species faced extinction moved several representatives to tears. "We, representing the human Emirate Republic, accept your surrender. Your territories will become our territories, your people will become our people, and we will treat them as we treat our own," High General Aratas announced, causing every non-human jaw in the chamber to drop in astonishment as she stepped forward and accepted his blade. "You, however, will be publicly executed for authorizing the destruction of Earth," High Admiral Bakiel stated, causing the Karkan to sigh and nod in resignation. "If this is the price I must pay for my people's survival, so be it. I anticipated this outcome," the former Karkan leader replied, rising to his feet and regaining some dignity as two human guards approached to escort him away to await execution. "May I address my people before I depart? There will be ample opportunity for that later," High Admiral Bakiel said, increasing the confusion perceptible throughout the chamber. "We will require your assistance in rescuing as many of your people as possible. Therefore, much as it pains me to say it, your execution will not occur for months, possibly years," the admiral added, with a note of irritation. With that statement, the Karkan was escorted from the chamber, followed shortly by the two human leaders, both wearing satisfied expressions. The humans then invaded former Karkan space, peacefully. They possessed more preserved and frozen meat than they could possibly consume themselves, and ensured that starving Karkans received as much food as they could safely digest. Within a year, humans had established supply networks throughout the newly annexed Karkan territory, and had prevented further starvation among their new subjects. Subsequently, humans deployed additional biological agents onto the former Karkan ranch worlds, but this time the engineered microorganisms were designed to neutralize the previous biological weapons that had devastated Karkan livestock. They also provided Karkans with an array of vaccines for themselves and their animals, in case the countermeasures weren't entirely effective. Several more years passed before humans and Karkans together restored full self-sufficiency to their territories. Regarding the Karkans themselves, integration into the human Emirate Republic proceeded remarkably smoothly. Karkans had been culturally conditioned to believe that strength conferred authority, and their honor code prohibited disrespecting those they recognized as superior. They understood that humans could have exterminated them completely, and respected the mercy shown to them. Additionally, Karkans lacked any concept of recreational activities beyond ritualized combat, which now non-lethal, provided excellent entertainment, and the various human sports offered Karkans perfect outlets for their martial inclinations. Furthermore, the fact that their former ruler remained at the side of the human leadership, encouraging his people to trust their new governors, significantly facilitated the transition. Speaking of the former Infinite Admiral, his execution was permanently suspended after human citizens across multiple worlds threatened civil unrest. The humans actually chose to spare the individual responsible for the complete and irreversible destruction of their home world. By that point, nothing could surprise us. After completing the reconstruction of their territories, humans swiftly filled the power vacuum left by the Karkans. Utilizing the resources and technology of the dismantled Karkan government, they rapidly constructed an impressive fleet crewed by both species and initiated an economic golden age that persists to this day. Years later, I inquired of the human who had governed their species during the conflict about their decision to engage in the largest siege warfare in galactic history. In his words, "We recognized that the Karkans intended to humiliate us. They wanted to maintain their reputation as the galaxy's intimidating bullies and gloat as they seized Earth. So we calculated a risk. We gambled that the Karkans were producing only the minimum food required to sustain their population, similar to the isolationists. Since they exported nothing but mining explosives, they had no incentive to produce substantially more food than their citizens needed." He delivered this explanation with the same matter-of-fact tone that you or I might use to describe an unremarkable breakfast. I then asked about the only occasion I had witnessed humans genuinely caring about something, the destruction of Earth. He sighed briefly and consumed whatever beverage filled his glass. "We were prepared for casualties, but I'm certain I don't need to explain the significance of a species' birthworld," he said, his voice hollow and melancholic. He sighed once more, and as though discussing a minor concession in a commercial negotiation, had the audacity to describe it as an acceptable loss. I couldn't contain myself. Having believed I had actually observed humans expressing genuine emotion, I discovered it was merely their process of accepting what they considered inevitable. Abandoning diplomatic protocol, I commented on his species' unnatural capacity to remain fundamentally unconcerned about anything, which prompted his laughter. It was then that I learned about the creature humans called the honey badger, and everything suddenly made sense. Humans recognized their inability to defeat the Karkans in conventional warfare. No species could have accomplished that. The Karkans' military might equal that of the entire galactic bureaucracy combined. But humans weren't obligated to engage in conventional warfare. No, they were the only species in the galaxy capable of waging war without giving a single fuck. Thus, no one has observed humans truly giving a fuck about anything since our initial contact, and considering the power they now wield, I doubt anyone ever will.